All right, boys. Today we're talking about best paper lead niche. Okay, so for those of you who don't know what paper lead is, it is basically the same skills as you have for freelance brand scaling and SMMA. Always the same, right? Media buying on social media ads, generating leads for 20, right? But you won't be selling to local businesses. Instead, you'll sell to the big boys. You'll sell to corporate businesses for a markup, right? So for insurance, they usually generate them for, if you're really good at it, for 20, 23, and you sell them for like 40. So you make a 50% profit, right? And how it usually works is sometimes you charge 50% upfront. They give you 50% upfront. With a few bigger companies, how it usually works, you need to take a bit more risk. You need to have a bit more balls. It's a bit more difficult, right? Because you need to be also generating all those leads, paying the money for it, and then after you deliver the leads, you wait like 30 days, and then the company is going to pay you. But those orders typically are way greater, like we're talking at least five figures, right? So from that perspective, it also makes sense because these large corporate businesses just move super slowly. They have internal processes, they need to get their documents sorted, etc., right? But essentially we're generating meta leads for 20 bucks, right? We're qualifying them with instant form, right? We throw in some disqualifying questions. So for insurance, that might be like, how have you had any diseases before, right? Because if you had cancer, nobody's gonna want to be your insurance company, right? Because you're just not a good customer. So those insurance companies definitely also want good quality leads that fulfill their criteria. That's why they're willing to pay a markup, 40 bucks, right? So that's the whole story behind it. And how do you now choose a paper lead niche? Because any kind of business in this world that needs to get new customers, you can basically monetize with paper lead, right? But some are worse and more difficult, and some are more easier. And now we're gonna get to the juicy part, because it's not only, right, the bigger the market, like insurance, it's a $1 trillion market. But hey, take into account how saturated the market is, right? A lot of people are doing insurance, super difficult to do, right? To be competing against established players who've been in the market 5 6 7 years, who've done at least seven figure in ad spend, right? That's crazy. How are you supposed to bullshit you out of that one, right? So what you want to also take into account is obviously the competitiveness and market saturation. So what that essentially means is how many competitors you have and how many people you can look up on ad meta ad library that basically run the same offer as you do, right? And you can also take a look and just chat GPT it and do your research, right? Now we come to the more psychological part behind it, because a lot of industries like healthcare, for instance, you're trying to get into a treatment, right, like IVF, which is in vitro fertilization, where you're trying to artificially create babies. Now those kinds of treatments, right, it's a very big decision. You pay like 10, 20, 30 grand for it sometimes, so you take a longer time to make this decision, which is why the sales cycle is longer. Now that's not essentially great in paper lead, right? Because it takes longer for the clients to see results and they will get stressed out, right? You need to probably help them as well on the sales side to make sure that they actually convert that the leads you send them. Because if they don't get any business out of your leads, you're kind of fucked, right? So you want to also find a business that has a short sales cycle, that can just pump out money like boom, boom, boom. And one, for instance, would be MCA, which is merchant cash advance. It's basically giving out like loans in cash, and those deals usually finalize within 1 week or a few days, right? So you have, like, imagine you're this company, right, and you're giving out loans, and the guy who gave you the customer gets a commission, right? Maybe like a 5% commission on 100 grand, but that's still 5 grand, right? And you got it in a few days instead of in IVF, where you had to wait 1 2 months 3 months to convert the patient, right? So the difference also makes a lot of sense in terms of how quick you're able to convert the customer, right? So sales cycle is very important, and we need to also consider, right, like the lifetime value of a patient. Take for instance the senior care vertical. It's very unsaturated, which is amazing, one of the best in my opinion, because if you get a client, a senior care client, right, they move into the senior care home, they just stay there until they die basically, right? And that means at least a lifetime value of six figures, sometimes even into the seven figures, right? So imagine the business that just paid you 50 or 100 bucks for a lead, but in 2 or 3 months time they managed to get a client out of you that would give them recurring revenue forever. So that's why senior care is an amazing vertical, right? Despite its long sales cycle, right? You typically need to wait 1 to 3 months because it's obviously a large decision where you want to end up living the rest of your life when you're like 70, 65 years old, right? But all of these factors have to be considered and kind of weighed. It's a lot of common sense that's in there, right? So you want to be also taking a look at it and not just asking ChatGPT, ask around, right? Go into some of these paper lead communities, right? And I can refer you to some if you need, basically to make sure to talk to people who are in these verticals, who have industry knowledge that other people that cannot get from ChatGPT, so to say. But yeah, looking at the market size, it needs to be at least 5 billion in my opinion, right? If it's under 5 billion, it's not really worth your time, because you also want to have a business where if you take even 0.01%, you're going to have a seven figure business, right? So the market size makes a huge difference, because then you have a lot of customers to go after, right? Senior care, it's a big industry. Everybody's going to get old, right? It's $1 billion industry, at least 10 billion, from my estimation. So there's going to be a lot of customers to go after. When you go onto lead scraping platforms like Apollo and other platforms, you're not going to run out of data, right? So that's super important as well. Now, the typical conversion rate is another big factor, because in healthcare, how the consumer psychology works is they go around 20 different clinics, compare each clinic, right? And they make a final decision based on reviews, based on feedback, based on pricing, based on yada yada, all these different factors. But then you have life insurance and you just, or auto insurance, where just you're just shopping for the, lowest price, or like the like a reputable company. You want to get it done within 30 minutes and move on with your life, right? So typically conversion rate in like commoditized industries like insurance, like home services, are typically higher than also in healthcare, right? In real estate, it's also quite low because you're obviously trying to buy a house. Now it's you kind of need to balance the conversion rate between also the average order value and lifetime value, right? Because for instance, in home care, right, if you're like one of the best providers in the region, your conversion rate also goes up. So on your side, what you need to be doing as a marketer is also trying your best to find companies that have reputation and that have existing sales system that can convert the customers you sent them. Because if they convert one or two and they see the return on investment coming from your leads, they're gonna buy way more, because it's just simple math, bro. Right? I'm not that great at math, but if they make 10 grand, right, in revenue, and maybe 3 grand of that is in profit from 10 of your leads, and they paid each lead maybe like 20 bucks, then it's a big return on investment, right? Now, another thing you need to take into account as the last thing, right, is X factors. So those are short-term opportunities and kind of loopholes, or very specific verticals that you would never know of. Not like, healthcare that is super, super broad. One such instance, right, that I just came across is a tax refund program for restaurant on tip income. Now you might ask yourself, what the fuck is even that? But what it essentially means is, in the United States, everybody tips like 18%, 20%, right? So what the government did is they wanted to incentivize people keeping track of their tip income. So what they did is, they said, hey, you keep track of your fucking tip income, and we're gonna pay you back 7% of all your tip income from the last 3 years. So take into account, right? Maybe you have a business that does has 20 employees, they work 40 hours on average, each get paid like bucks minimum wage, but they get 700 bucks on average as tips per week, right? And they work 34 weeks per year. Now if you do quick maths, right, you're gonna see that basically in the last year they would have had 500 grand worth of tips. That's not like just overall revenue, that's alone from the tips that the employees get, right? And the tip credit, which is 7%, like I said, the government is going to give you the 7% back on the whole tip income. That's 36 grand. Now, somebody, for instance, is also developed this program, right, where they can kind of streamline this process and make sure that they get their money back. Because until now, this thing was kind of in the dark. This law was already established in 1997 or some shit, right? It's a long time ago. But nobody really utilized it because it was such a headache to deal with the IRS. You had all this paperwork, right? It took like months, even 1 year of back and forth to get all of this stuff sorted out. So nobody cared about this, right? They thought it was like a dead end. It was like it's not worth the effort and time put into it. But there's a guy who kind of streamlined it, right? He made it so simple that you can sign 4 documents, get it done within 15 minutes, right? Obviously, you need to take into the account the time the business owners, they do their research, obviously, like 2 hours, but still 3 hours, let's say, rough estimate, 2 hours research, 1 hour filling out the documents, boom. And they get not 36K, because like I said, it was not the 1 year worth of 7% of the tip income. It was 3 years worth. So it's not 36, but 100 something K, right? So they get 100K back, but here's the kicker. The guy who streamlined the software, he's gonna get a percentage back, like 30 or 25. I'm not entirely sure, right? So this guy, right, we can also sell him leads for the restaurant owners, and he's gonna be willing to pay it because, for instance, he makes 36 grand on like not 36 grand, but he makes 30% on the whole deal, right? For instance, if the restaurant gets 100K back from the government for 7% of all their tip income in the last 3 years, then he would get 30% of that, which is 30 grand from the 100K, right? So obviously he's going to be willing to pay for leads for restaurant owners who are willing to basically also, get free money, right? And if you're interested in setting up such an offer, just talk to me on Instagram. I'll walk you through it, right? It's like something that's just popped up the last 2 or 3 weeks or so. So it's quite fresh. Not a lot of like free companies in the world are doing it. And there was what, like 2 million service-based businesses that have tips. So it is an insanely big opportunity. But yeah, that's all for today, boys. Remember to use common sense in picking up a market, because it is fucking important, right? If you have a shit market, doesn't matter if you're a sales genius or have like insane aura or charisma on the call, or exactly what you're doing. It's still gonna be a bad market, and being successful in pay per lead really heavily relies on the market choice as well. All right, see you soon. Thank you.